Welcome to Future Knowledge, a podcast about knowledge, creativity, and policy, brought to you by the Internet Archive and Authors Alliance. For centuries, memory institutions like libraries, archives, and museums have owned their collections. Libraries bought books and they loaned them out until they fell apart or they were no longer needed in the collection. But that model is changing rapidly in the digital age, moving from ownership to licensing and temporary access. So, what happens to the public's right to access knowledge when libraries no longer own the collections they manage? And how can we ensure that the rights our memory institutions have always relied on in the physical world carry forward into the digital one? Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Freeland, a librarian at the Internet Archive. Here to help set the stage for why these digital rights are so important is Brewster Kahle, the digital librarian and founder of the Internet Archive.
Thank you, Chris. Asserting these four digital rights of libraries is surprisingly important and actually even potentially existentially important. And it may be surprising because most people think that this is what libraries are and libraries do. What libraries have always done is they built collections, often by purchasing materials and then preserving them, lending them out, and then working with other libraries on interlibrary loan and fulfillment. But all of those are challenged now in this digital age by major publishers going and saying that they're not allowed to build collections by buying them. They're not allowed to preserve except on the way that they say they can. And they are not allowed to lend nor interoperate with other libraries. This is critically important to reestablish. And the Internet Archive Europe has been around large part because of these challenges and the receptivity globally of going and supporting these digital rights of libraries. So the four digital rights of libraries is being actively supported by the Internet Archive Europe, a library that's been around for now 20 years in terms of establishing collections on European soil and is now building and is expanding, finding that this support for the Internet Archive Europe and these digital rights are now seen globally and they're being adopted globally, which we see as a positive step forward for libraries around the world working together to build a secure, better library system. Now is a time for the library system to come together to assert our rights in our digital world, that we should not lose rights that we had in the physical world as we move digital. It should be a better future. It should be more accessible. It should have better preservation. And that is the core issues of the four rights of digital libraries. So we call on all libraries, museums, archives, all the cultural heritage institutions to sign up as institutions to show that this is the way forward.
Here to welcome our speakers is Dave Hansen, the Executive Director of Authors Alliance.
Thanks, Chris. I'm really pleased to co-host today. The mission of Authors Alliance is to advance the interests of authors who want to serve the public good by sharing their creations broadly. Libraries are absolutely critical to that mission, but their ability to preserve authors' books and make them available both now and to the future generations is in jeopardy. So today we'll be in conversation with a number of librarians from across the globe, including representatives from Liber, Aruba, Internet Archive, and elsewhere to talk about the importance of digital rights of libraries. So Leela, I'll turn it over to you, and maybe you can start by giving us the origin story of this work on digital rights of libraries.
Thanks so much for the kind introduction, Dave. I could not be more excited to be here having this conversation with these folks right now. This conversation has been in the works really for the last 3, 4 years with the Internet Archive, our library partners, and our partners around the public interest technology policy space. In 2022, way, way, way back before ChatGPT was even launched upon the world, we convened a group of librarians and tech policy advocates to ask the question, what is the role of libraries in our current digital information ecosystem? How can we ensure that libraries still retain their traditional rights while supporting people in the transition to the digital age? We held in person workshops, hours of, conversations over Zoom. And through all of these conversations, the insight that we came back to time and again really was, let libraries be libraries. Libraries have played a role of preservation and access for centuries. And really, this transition to the digital world shouldn't undercut that role. In fact, we need libraries and memory institutions, institutions that are built in order to make sure that the stuff that is being published and said today is still available to people in the future, and to ensure that the general public has access to these things regardless of where they live, what is their country or zip code, or just the happenstance of their birth, right? Everybody deserves access to high quality information that libraries and other memory institutions have been collecting for generations. So, out of this set of conversations, I authored a report with my co author, Michael Mena. It was called Securing the Digital Rights for Libraries. And the report looked at the core functions of libraries, really centered around preservation and access. And it articulated sort of a proto version of these four essential rights of libraries in the digital world. That version was focused on United States libraries because that's who was in our convenings. And it was really centered around access to ebooks. Around the time that the report was published at the end of 2022, the Internet Archive was building a partnership with the island nation of Aruba to basically back up their entire culture digitally, to ensure that regardless of, you know, what climate may bring, what, sort of future political scenarios may bring, people who care about the history and culture of Aruba could have access to it. And it was through conversations with those librarians that really helped us understand that these rights are necessary not just for libraries, but all kinds of memory institutions, including archives and museums and small little, historical societies. And not just for books, but really for all kinds of materials, right? Libraries don't just have books, they have everything. And these rights need to apply broadly to any kind of material. And of course, not just to the United States, right? It's important that these rights exist globally because our library system is global and there are people everywhere who deserve access to high quality information. And so those conversations morphed into, or evolved, I should say, into a statement for protecting the rights of memory institutions in the digital age that Aruba was the first nation to sign. And then what happened next was it took off. Global audiences started seeing the statement and thought, wow, that really matters. That's really important. And through a series of conversations that we're going to get into next, this evolved into what became known as Our Future Memory campaign that's being driven by the Internet Archive Europe. And so to set up the rest of this conversation, I just want to read the rights so we're all on the same page. I want to just read the statement so everybody understands exactly what it is we're talking about. So from the statement, it says, simply put, the rights and responsibilities that memory institutions have always enjoyed offline must also be protected online. To accomplish this goal, libraries, archives, museums, and memory institutions must have the legal right and practical ability to 1. Collect materials in digital form, whether through digitization of physical collections or through purchasing digital materials on the open market or by other legal means. 2. To preserve digital materials, where necessary, being able to repair, back up, or reformat them to ensure their long term existence and availability. 3. To provide controlled access to digital materials for advanced research techniques and to patrons where they are online. And finally, the fourth right, to be able to cooperate with other memory institutions by sharing or transferring digital collections so as to aid the core functions of preservation and access. At this point, I want to bring Adam into the conversation so that he can talk a bit about his reaction to the statement, why he thinks this matters in this moment. Adam, come and join us in this conversation.
Hello. Well, the story about four digital rights really starts with me, and this is individual, but I guess many people around the globe might find themselves in my story. It really started in a meeting room in Den Haag, in Holland, where Internet Archive met Liber Europe, let's say. And there was a lot of back and forth during this meeting, and I just realized that we really need a simple statement that everybody can accept really quickly and understand really quickly and do something about it realistically. And signing this document is not a really hard thing to do. And later, this turned right because in Serbia, we really had a great success with National Library of Serbia, Serbian Library Association, and many other institutions signing this for digital rights statement. And not just libraries, but also museums, also archives, also culture NGOs, but also a high school library and many different institutions. Because though the for digital rights may appeal to libraries the most, it also plays along other cultural institution and organization concerns and goals in digital world, because we really want to continue doing our work in digital world. I've been an apologist for a digital for 20 years, always saying this is really something new, a new world has been born. But we don't want to stamp over the old world. We just want to build it even better and nicer and shinier. But we want to keep all the good things that we developed in the pre-digital world. And that's exactly what For Digital Right Documents is saying. My feeling is that, and I'm sure that globally many people share this feeling, that winter is coming and everybody knows what we're talking about. And when winter comes, the temperature falls down. What we can do is huddle together to give us more warmth by joining our single forces into something more united. And for digital rights document is this thing that can bring us together because it's simple, it's easy to sign, and we really need to do something. And this can be a starting point of global understanding. And if we cannot do this thing now, I doubt what bigger things we strive for doing. So I would really love to see more people globally signing this document, joining the movement, and giving a promise for a brighter future by their signature. Let's keep our rights in digital world. Let this world not be our doom, but our hope. By preserving our rights, and in such a world, then we will be able to expand all those beautiful things that digital tools are promising to us. And that's one thing that, as I said, we did in Serbia. Many institutions signed off, and I think it's getting off in Europe as well. Libre conference in Lausanne was a great place to have conversation with colleagues from almost every European country. And I'm expecting that in coming weeks and months, a lot of signatures will be coming from European countries, and that Europe will unite and that the world will unite along the way. So that's my hope for the future, and that's why I support and advocate for digital rights document of Internet Archive Europe.
Well, I can see how you managed to get so many people to sign. That was just a really beautiful and powerful statement. Hearing you say, let's not let this transition to the digital world be our doom, but let it be our hope. That's just a beautiful thing to say, especially as I think a lot of people are really nervous about this digital future. There's a lot of anxiety about how we know that anything is true anymore. We were worried about that even before generative AI came onto the scene, and now I think those fears are even more heightened. So the idea that libraries have a real role to anchor people in a common shared set of truth, a set of facts and information. It feels harder and harder these days for some reason that I don't need to get into here. But Adam, thank you so much for that really impassioned viewpoint about why these rights really matter right now. You mentioned the Lieber conference. And so there was a panel on July 4th at the Lieber conference about the four digital rights of libraries. And so now I want to bring Carolyn DeCock into the conversation because she was one of the panelists who was actually at the conference. And so I'd like to bring her into the conversation now to talk about what happened at the panel, what the audience thought of these rights, and maybe can also talk a little bit about our future memory as a movement and a campaign.
Thank you, Lila, for the intro. Yes, I had the pleasure and honor of being at that Liber conference panel, and I've been in tech for a long time, for over 25 years, and the vibe you get at that Liber conference is amazing. You have 500 people whose main concern in life is preserving universal access to knowledge. That's what all the workshops are about. That's what all the discussions in the corridors are about. That's what they are all working on. And it's mostly European libraries or library representatives, but there was also a big delegation from Canada. I mean, everyone was there. And so when we presented the digital rights on a panel with other experts, Justus Dreiling from Communia was there, Jeff Ubois for the Internet Archive Europe, and Peter Routier from Internet Archive, I think the reception was like, yes, that's exactly what we've been saying for ages in various forms, and we've been working on it, and we've been asking it in our own countries, and we've been asking it in specialized forums. But yes, it needs to be stated plainly. At the moment, memory institutions are facing, I think, a situation that has never been more critical in terms of being able to fulfill their mission in the future. And that is a situation where they no longer have control over the collections they're trying to preserve and share access with their patrons, with the people that come to lend books or with the people that want to do research. And so basically, we're shifting to a model where they owned physical books that were sitting on shelves and that people knew would be there for the long term, to a model where they are basically seeing their collections disappear like Snapchat stories. They don't know what's happening. Publishers can decide to remove them unilaterally from the collections. And, there's really sad cases of even textbooks disappearing midterm in universities or in research libraries, and students just sitting there and not being able to access, the books of their teachers, for example. Aside from that, welcoming the statement, because librarians are, I think, very practical people and they're very action oriented to a certain extent, the next thing was, okay, so what do we do now? We signed the statement. What are we gonna, who are we asking what? And how can we make these challenges disappear? How can we make our situation better? How can we ensure that access to knowledge is what we can still provide? And so one of the ideas, for example, at European level that started being discussed in the corridors was Europe is looking at a Digital Fairness Act next year, end of this year, next year, which will be an act that focuses on consumer protection. But a lot of the librarians felt like, they are a bridge to a certain extent between consumers and knowledge. They're just the middleman to a certain extent. And one of the traditions in consumer protection in Europe is that if certain unfair clauses are inserted in consumer contracts, then those clauses are considered to be not applicable to consumers because the imbalance of power in negotiations between a consumer and a business is usually to the detriment of the consumer. So a lot of the librarians said, well, digital fairness sounds like what we need as libraries in this context. So maybe we should get a list of the most obnoxious clauses that we can find in our contracts and ask for those clauses to no longer be acceptable in contracts. Because at the moment, I think libraries are spending a lot of time and a lot of resources negotiating contracts with publishers. And in a lot of cases, they're not super successful because sadly, there is an imbalance of power when you have a big publisher and you have libraries, but also I think there's an imbalance in mission, because at the end of the day, because libraries' mission is to give access to the best possible knowledge, that puts you in a very weak negotiating position when you're talking to the big publishers that, have the monopoly right on that knowledge.
Absolutely. And that really was the exact sentiment of the librarians in the rooms that we were chatting with in back in 2022. This situation has only gotten worse and worse over time, is not improving. So not only for a world where, libraries are having to negotiate access for books and journal literature and scientific research, but also where a lot of content culture is being put out in this stream only fashion, right? You subscribe to it, it's a subscription, and you stream it, and whatever's there on the streaming service is there while it's there. And then it's not anymore whenever the back end licensing agreement expires, and the library has no ability to say this specific piece, this particular movie, this particular show, this particular song is so important and essential to our community that we want to ensure that this is available for the long term, not just for however long it's commercially viable for whoever's making money off of it today, right? Like that's been the role of libraries forever, is to ensure that things that might be relevant and important to a community, but not necessarily commercially viable or successful anymore, that those things are still around for people to enjoy, to learn from, to remix and reuse and create their own, whether it's research, scientific understanding, or whether it's new creative works, building on top of that stuff. That's what libraries have enabled. That's what memory institutions are for. And I don't want to only be talking about libraries. I know we've centered a lot of this conversation on libraries because the Internet Archive is a library, the Liber Conference is a conference for librarians, but we hear the same challenges from archives and museums and historical societies and other kinds of entities that care about preserving and ensuring that their community has access, not just at the whim of whoever's making money off of it in the moment, right? But they have access to it for the long term. So that, the fact that that is still the state today and is really feeling like it's only getting more and more locked in really speaks to what Adam was talking about. Like, this is the moment, right? Like, winter is coming, winter's kind of here when we're thinking about access to information, especially high quality information, for the long term, and stuff that can't just be removed or edited in post, right? Or just changed after the fact, or just taken out of the context, taken out of the stream of commercial play, and then now it's not available to anybody to refer to ever again. And that really feels precarious to our democratic institutions, to our ability to engage in civic life. And so that's something that we're really focused on with the Future Memory campaign. One other thing, Carolyn, I remember you saying as one of the pieces of or the questions that people had at the Liber conference was really about the role of Internet Archive Europe and the statement and the campaign.
So one of the other feedbacks we got after our presentation on the panel was, I think a lot of people were excited about the fact that Internet Archive Europe was driving this campaign and was supporting it, because I think Internet Archive has always been associated with this idea of universal access to knowledge. And people are really welcoming the fact that Internet Archive Europe specifically is now expanding its scope and its work on the ground. Also, I think because Europe has, a tradition of trying to protect the little guy. We're into that. That's our thing. And so I'm really hoping that we can get, our policymakers to take this on board and to push for it.
So as Carolyn noted, people are excited that Internet Archive Europe has become more of a, let's say, a more real, a more fleshed out institution in Europe. I know that it's been an entity and servers for a very long time, but now it's a building and it's people on the ground actually doing work. And that does feel exciting as somebody that's worked at the Internet Archive, the US entity, for the last 10 years and saw over the course of the last about, I think it was like 8 or so years, the real emergence of Internet Archive Canada coming into its own over the course of the last decade. It feels like Internet Archive Europe maybe is going to have that moment coming out of this particular moment in time in the digital ecosystem. And so, Brewster, I'd love to have you come back and say a little bit more about Internet Archive Europe. What do you see its role as being right now for Europe and globally?
The Internet Archive has been working with global institutions, national libraries, universities all over the world as the Internet Archive, and that's been very successful. But the idea of having an Internet Archive Europe, which was founded in 2004, was to build something with European values under European law and structures and build upon that. And it grew to have servers that were supported in Europe on soil, but also grew to have about 20 people in it working to do web archiving with lots of different organizations. But then it came back down again as the Internet Archive got better at working globally. But it's time again for the Internet Archive Europe, and it's now growing. Referred to, there's now a building and offices in Amsterdam to go and serve the European community, particularly, or actually the globe, but from a European perspective. And the opportunity is to leverage things like the cultural heritage organizations exemptions in the copyright exemptions to go and build libraries kind of the way we've always wanted to. There have been support now in Europe for libraries that actually we're not seeing in some other countries around the world. So we're excited to see the Internet Archive Europe flourish.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Brewster. Now, I'd like Carolyn and Adam to say a little bit about where you hope to see our future memory campaign and the four digital rights for memory institutions, where you'd like to see us go next. Adam, why don't we start with you and then Carolyn?
Okay, I'll be happy to. I see this campaign as a merger of best America and Europe can provide to each other. Entrepreneurship that was for last 20, 30 years almost been done by Internet Archive, and European frameworks and the historical experiences, and the best Europe can provide to refine and bring closer to the vast European nation array of states is, I think, a promise for the future. How to build a united front, united stand in preserving those global values that we all care about, which is universal access to knowledge and everything that stems from this. And this is why I see this campaign as one of the ray of hopes in this particular moment in history and in time, and especially having in mind the need for all culture institutions, museum, archives, libraries, galleries, everybody that deals with the culture and science to get together, because in these difficult times, institutions, no matter how strong they seem, as some US universities or European culture institutions, cannot preserve their values alone. We have to stand together, and this is a great opportunity to do so.
To me, this is just a starting point that builds on the shoulders of previous movements that were already launched by libraries and memory institutions, like the Hague Declaration, for example. It's a movement that I think we cannot afford to not push forward with a lot of energy, because we see debates on disinformation, We see debates on quality of data for AI. We see debates about people being confused about what is the truth, what isn't the truth, and what is, the past and what our future looks like. And librarians and memory institutions have always been the places and the people where those things you could kind of trust that you would get the right answer, or at least that they would help you ask the right questions. Let's say. So if we don't preserve that, we're in trouble, basically. So in terms of next steps, I'm hoping that I'm European, so summer break is kind of sacred for us. So I'm not expecting a rush of European institutions during summer signing up, but I'm pretty sure that after summer break, we will get that enthusiasm going with a lot of tanned people with a smile. And then the other thing is, as I said, this is not just signing a statement. I'm hoping this is kickstarting a movement where, in every forum where we can get our voice heard, we will stand up and we will bring the arguments to try and change the situation and reclaim the rights that libraries have had for centuries. Because I do not think that it makes a lot of sense when Europe is trying to get good legislation in place for cultural heritage institutions, for example, that publishers then come with contracts that say, and this contract will be under the laws of Delaware in the United States. So I'd like those things to stop because they hurt my feelings as a lawyer and they hurt my feelings as a fundamental rights person. And let's hope the movement goes there.
Outstanding. I am now so thrilled to bring someone new into this conversation. We've got Stephen Weiber here from IFLA, or the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, because they have just agreed to sign the statement. And this is a really wonderful moment for this little campaign, because really what we're doing here builds on the efforts of so many other library organizations, IFLA being really chief among them. So we are absolutely delighted to bring Stephen Weiber into the conversation. Stephen, welcome. Can you say a little bit about what IFLA is as an organization and what's your role there?
Of course, and of course, we're thrilled that you're thrilled. So, IFLA is, so as you've heard, I think that the name spells it out, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. Effectively, we are the global organization for libraries of all sorts. So, going from the smallest school library or village library right up to the grandest national institutions, parliamentary libraries, and so on. And I think crucially, we've got two key roles. I think the first primarily is to provide a space where librarians, where library and information workers can come together, can share, can exchange, can learn, can develop standards and insights, and really actually deliver on that sort of constant improvement that makes sure that everyone can benefit from excellent library services. Crucially, also what we do is we do advocacy. And that's because the way that libraries work, libraries' ability to fulfill that mission, to play that crucial role in the information environment, that depends on the environment we work in ourselves. So we need the right laws. And so that is about funding, but it's also about the laws that determine what it is that we can do, that we can acquire, that we can safeguard, that we can give access to, and how. And so, really, a key thing that we do, therefore, is we try to reach out. We try to communicate what it is that libraries are, what it is that libraries do to others in other spaces, to help them understand, to see that potential, to see all that they can gain from having a strong, a dynamic, and innovative and attractive library sector. So, as part of our broader advocacy work, we very much focus on copyright. And copyright it's often seen as a topic that is, it's seen as being complex, it's seen as being controversial, it's seen as being conflictual, something that people would rather not talk about, despite its completely determining impact on what it is that libraries can actually do. And we need to be there. We need to make the case to talk about why it is that libraries should be involved. But also, crucially, we need to convince, to work with our own field, to make sure that people in the library field feel empowered, feel ready to actually get up, to write to their members of parliament, their senators, their congressmen, whatever, in order to share their experience, to underline why it matters that libraries have the laws that they need. Withrow as an organisation has been around for some time. We were in fact set up in 1927. Our first offices were in the offices of the League of Nations. And so we've been around for some time and we'll celebrate our centenary in 1927. I think we're also proud of our reach. So we have about 1,600 members in about 150 countries around the world. Crucially, we're a federation. And so when we sign up to the rights, that doesn't mean that no one else can do so. We really encourage our members to look at them, to take them on board, to translate them into your own languages, and to think about how you can disseminate them further and use them in your own work and advocacy. My role within IFLA is Director for External Affairs. And so within that role, I oversee our work on policy and advocacy, but I also oversee our work around trying to build up those partnerships, that understanding of what it is that libraries can do to make those connections, to deliver those unique strengths that libraries have due to their collections, but also, of course, due to the staff, due to the spaces that they have.
Thank you so much. Stephen, that was a wonderful explanation of all the many wonderful things that IFLA does and is for the library community. It's a great transition into this statement because the genesis of the statement really is grounded in the role of libraries, the traditional core functions of libraries in society, of building collections for permanent long-term access that everybody can have access to. That's what libraries do. And I think it's easy for folks to discount the importance, the centrality of that role in society now that we have so much information easily at our fingertips. But not all of that information is high quality, is research backed, is even really relevant to what a person might be looking for or interested in. And that's been the role of libraries forever. And I just think it's important also to say it in this moment, as you brought up copyright law being this foundational set of rules that libraries operate within, because libraries predate copyright law by centuries.
Of course. So in recent years, we start to talk about the knowledge commons and so on, but I think that idea has been around forever. If you look at the reasons why libraries started to appear under wildly different cultural contexts. So you look at the history of libraries in Korea, you look at the history of libraries in Africa, you look at the history of libraries in pre-Columbian cultures, and they've all come about because there's this understanding of the power, the importance of knowledge, the importance of being able to safeguard, to organize that knowledge in a way that it can be used to make progress, to take care of what's actually important. And so this appreciation that's always been there, and libraries have been the profession, the institution, the place, the structure that actually allows us to realize the potential to build on knowledge in that way. As you say, copyright, it's an incredibly recent idea in the context compared to the history of libraries themselves. And yes, at the beginning, it was created as a way of trying to support. Well, you can argue in different ways. In some ways, it was created as a way of just compensating for the fact that there was less censorship than there was beforehand. It was ostensibly created as a way of supporting the flow of knowledge and information around. But of course, like with anything, people see an opportunity, it gets sidetracked, it gets exploited, it gets used to create business models that ultimately end up going a long way away from the original function of copyright, that become far more about speculating, become far more about actually how do you extract maximum profit rather than how do we make sure there is that access to material? How do we make sure that everyone is able to benefit, to take part in that knowledge commons?
Exactly right. So we need copyright laws and consumer protection laws and privacy laws that work for the modern era, that work for libraries as they look today. And those laws in the digital era really have just simply preferenced commercial rights holders. And it's been very challenging for libraries to operate in that, basically in the interstitial between the rights, the exclusive rights of a lot of these big commercial rights holders. Stephen, now if you would tell us a little bit about why IFLA chose to sign this statement of 4 digital rights for protecting memory institutions online.
It's such a good initiative. I think, as far as we were concerned, when we looked for the first time at those 4 rights, when prompted by Internet Archive Europe to take a look, we sat down and thought, this stuff is obvious, isn't it? This is just reaffirming the things that libraries have always done. These are basic functions that need to be in place, not just to deliver library rights, but ultimately library rights are the rights of the community that depends on libraries to actually get things done, to fulfill their own rights, to fulfill their own potential. Now, I think, as I said, we've been active around copyright for a long time. We've seen it as being valuable, but I don't think we're not kidding ourselves. We certainly haven't won. I think there definitely is a challenge in the digital world, and you've talked a little bit about the risk, the fact that the shift to digitization has seen laws shift in favor of rights holders. I think, from our point of view, what we've really seen, it's a deregulation by stealth. Quietly, little bit by bit, all of the protections, all of the balancing factors that were in place have been undermined. They've been sort of taken away from us by the fact that it's not that contract, that it's not that sale that matters. Everything is now done under contract. And so whatever goes in that contract is the law. And so all of those efforts, all of that careful balance that's been looked for so many years, it's gone. It's been washed away. We've ended up in a sort of a wild west. We've seen a rewilding of copyright that doesn't benefit libraries. And so, given that we're still in that case, and given in particular what we're seeing with trends in licensing, in particular around text and data mining, it's really important just to keep making that noise, to keep underlining what happened. I think things that we really liked about the 4 rights, firstly, it's the importance of talking about rights. It's crazy that when we're talking about things that are as important as the preservation of our history, access to information, for accountability, for reproducibility, when we're talking about access for research, for education, it's crazy that we should call these exceptions. These should be the rule. These should not be exceptions. It's such a horrible, such an unfortunate choice of word. So, firstly, it's that emphasis on rights on behalf of libraries, but more importantly, of their users. I think it's also that the sheer simplicity is a real strength. I think I was mentioning earlier that copyright is often portrayed as being conflictual, as being contested, as being complex, but that's not a given. That's an image and understanding of copyright that has been constructed, often by lawyers who make lots of money by being able to deal with complexity where other people can't, often because it's intimidating for a librarian who just wants to get out there and actually do things and isn't trained, isn't supported necessarily in actually negotiating contracts. So actually the simplicity of those 4 rights, setting out what we need in clear and easy language in a way that I hope that people will be able to look at it, people will be able to take it up, to make it part of their work, to use it as a lens for understanding what makes a good law. As if a legal system, if a legal framework is not fulfilling those 4 rights, it's not working. And it's really important for librarians to be able to look at laws and be able to say very clearly, well, that's not on.
Absolutely. And that's why, actually, in the statement itself, it talks about these are rights, and we should not permit these rights to be overwritten either by contractual limitations or by technological mechanisms, just for practical reasons, make it so that libraries cannot perform these functions. So, importantly, these rights are situated not as carve outs, not as something where we have to live in the spaces in between the exclusive rights of rights holders, but rather libraries and the public that rely on libraries have affirmative rights in their own access to this information in the long term. So you've really hit the nail on the head here, Stephen. And thank you so much. As our final question here with you, I'd love to just hear where you hope to see this effort go next.
So I hope that this can really be popularized. I hope that this really can be taken up within institutions, that it can be this ready reckoner. It's a postcard thing that you can pick, that people can put on the wall and actually use as a reminder of what law should be, of what should be in place. It's a great sort of North Star, Pole Star compass for what needs to be done. But I think through that, actually, we really realize the potential of libraries, but I think crucially also sister organizations, archives, museums, any organization that at the moment lives under sufferance that can only exist because it's tolerated by rights holders. And how do we actually make sure that they can see that, they can mobilize, and this network that is present in every town and village and city and neighborhood actually can be mobilized, can show that, can be ready to actually underline that in order to be able to fulfill their missions, in order to be able to preserve these things that really do matter, we need to see the rights of libraries, but more importantly, the rights of their users as the rule, not the exception.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I am so excited that we are now going to be joined by Raymond Hernandez, Director of Nacional Archives Aruba, and Peter Scolling, the Head of Digital Collections and Research of the National Library of Aruba, to talk a bit about how the statement came to life, how it came to being. Peter, why don't we start with you? Because really, we began having these conversations when you came to the Internet Archive for our Library Leaders Forum, and we began talking about this report, the for securing digital rights for libraries, articulating these rights that were associated with the core functions of libraries. And just let's talk a little bit about how the statement came to be and why Aruba felt like this was really an important thing to put out into the world.
We've been working on getting our information out there as libraries, as archives for decades now. The Aruba National Library has existed for over 75 years. So we have a long history of dispersing knowledge, information to our patrons locally, and over the last decade or decades also in a digital form, which was amplified in 2018, 2019, when we started collaborating with the Internet Archive as a platform and as a podium to get our information, our Aruban information about culture, about literature, about language, about our history online, just to the Aruban public at first. But, well, if it's online, you can broadcast it all over the world and it's accessible. So the core of our work is providing access to information. And I think in their conversations with the Internet Archive, with like-minded people all over the world, and thankfully also based in San Francisco at the Internet Archive, there's a shared purpose in getting the information you want to share out there. And there's a lot of barriers to information, paywalls, different rights of libraries that we have when we're lending out our books to patrons locally. In a digital format, it hasn't been defined as clearly, and especially not across international borders, as we'd like to. So it's just our way of contributing to that conversation and sharing with the world that we're about sharing the information about open access to knowledge. We do that together with the Internet Archive. We do that together with the Wiki and Open movement, with Creative Commons, for instance, in the movement towards access to open cultural heritage, for instance. We do that through our partnership and our participation within the UNESCO community. So there's many different ways to go about it, but I think in its core, in its essence, this is about open access to information. And whether a library or an archive is doing that in a physical sense or in a digital sense, it shouldn't matter. And that's what this statement is about as well.
Raymond, I'd like to hear from you. Why did all of these organizations from Aruba come together to sign this statement? Now, there's a full list here of different organizations that signed. Would you mind telling us who all signed? And then why do you think it was so essential for all of these different important organizations within Aruba to sign in?
Yes, first of all, I have to say that when the National Library went online through the Internet Archive, A year later, we as National Archives also did the same. And at that moment, we thought, why not do that in a kind of platform? There's not only the National Library and the National Archive presenting their collection separately, but to do that for the whole island. And that was the first step in which we gathered all the possible partners to start a platform, which we today call the Collection Aruba, this Aruba collection. I think that when the four rights came in, it was just a good moment that we have all those institutions together, that most of them did follow us when we told them why we want to do this. For us in Aruba signing, we call it the Oranjestad principles. It made kind of sense for little islands like Aruba. Memory institutions like the archives and libraries have always played a vital public role, collecting, preserving, and also giving access to knowledge. And I think that when we moved online, when everything is moving online, we don't have to just stop because things are online. And especially for small island states like ours, digital access is essential. A lot of our historical memory, especially from the colonial period, is scattered across the region in the Netherlands and even in the States. We just made a commitment with the New York established the new Netherlands Institute to share their colonial materials they have online, to share it also on Collection Aruba, to make our colonial past more accessible. There they have the Curaçao papers in the time of the West Indian Company, and with Peter's well-known name in the Netherlands. Peter Stuyvesant was director in the then called New Amsterdam. And those information they have about our islands, because he was at the same time the director of the colonies in the Caribbean Sea. And they have so many information, and by putting this together in the collection, we can make it possible for not only we Arubians to get those information, but also all our diaspora living everywhere in the world, they can access now the information at this site. And so for us, I think the signing was a kind of expression that it is not only about cultural equity, but it is to make sure our communities aren't left out of the digital future. And I think that is one of the main reasons we signed at that moment. And we have, for instance, UNESCO Committee of Aruba who signed it, the National Library, of course, the Collection Aruba itself, and we have also the Museo Arqueológico, that's the Archaeological Museum of Aruba, and also the UNOCA, that's an entity that is providing funds for cultural participation for the public and artists, but also they kept a great range of paintings from local artists from 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the last one is also the Monument Fund of Aruba. And there are a lot of more that signed at that time. But for us, it's just to make it clear that we as little nations, small island states, don't want to be left behind in this new technological world.
Maybe I can talk a bit about the occasion. In April of 2024 on the island of Aruba, that's why we initially call it the Orice Declaration. We organized the first Dutch Caribbean Digital Heritage Week, in which we wanted to focus on not just digitization, but also collaboration on that part and knowledge exchange. And to do that, we started with a 2-day symposium with speakers from all over the world, from the Dutch Institute of Sound and Vision, who also signed at that moment, with the Internet Archive, with institutions from all 6 islands of the Dutch Caribbean present. And we had an entire week of working on a joint statement for digital heritage in the Dutch Caribbean, in talking about mitigating the diaspora in a digital way, in making sure that all the scattered collections, not just on the islands from our different institutions, but also those that are in the US, in other parts of the Caribbean or in Europe, for instance. In a digital way, you can provide that access without barriers in one single location. And on the second day of this conference, the symposium, we said, well, this is the best moment to sign the statement. And that's why you have all those signatories. It's mostly the organizations behind the Aruba collection, like Raymond mentioned, which they have their separate collections, but by joining everything into sub-collections of the Internet Archive, of the Aruban part of the Internet Archive, and on the Aruba collection website, you can present it as an integral search engine for our heritage materials. And yeah, it's the purpose, the mission of the Internet Archive and the statement which we jointly drafted. I think it was a really good moment and an important moment for not just Aruba, but I'm glad that it was the start of a wider movement as well, which now has become the Our Future Memory movement. And with all those signatories signing internationally, especially in Europe at the moment, yeah, it's great to see that happen. And I'm really proud that it started in Aruba.
Thank you so much. Carolyn, can you please tell everyone if they are interested in signing the rights, how can they do that?
Okay, so it's actually quite simple and a bit old-fashioned to a certain extent. So you go to our website, ourfuturememory.org, and there you will see a big button that allows you to download the statement. It's a PDF. And you can do two things. You either use the analog way, you print it, you sign it mechanically with a pen, you scan it, and you send it to the email that's on there, which is campaigns@internetarchive.eu. Or you can just download the PDF, sign it electronically, and email it to that same email, campaigns@internetarchive.eu. The only two limitations are that we only accept organizations and institutions at this stage, so not individuals. And we ask you to also make sure that you're representing that organization when you are signing, obviously. For the remainder, where the rights are addressed, obviously, to memory institutions and to making sure their mission can continue, signatories can come from any part of the spectrum as long as they share that mission of access to knowledge and ensuring that memory institutions can continue their work. So digital rights organizations, organizations that are concerned about the environment, all kinds of other civil society organizations are welcome to sign and to get in touch and encourage others to do so.
So, where do we go with all of this? Well, as you heard today, from global library leaders at IFLA to dedicated archivists in Aruba to the growing coalition of European librarians championing these rights, one thing is clear. The future of libraries and all memory institutions depends on our ability to act collectively across borders to protect public access to knowledge and culture. So if you're part of a library, archive, or museum and haven't yet endorsed the statement, visit ourfuturememory.org to learn more and add your support. And if you believe, like we do, that memory institutions need legal rights to preserve, lend, and give access to digital materials, help us spread the word.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the future of knowledge. Be sure to follow the show. New episodes drop every other Wednesday with bold ideas, fresh insights, and the voices shaping tomorrow.